we're going to have to rebuild a legitimate economy that is self-sufficient, meaning that if we want to consume, we got to produce. If we want to borrow, somebody else in America has to save. We can't rely on the world's manufacturing capacity, and we can't rely on the world's savings.
In today's video, Peter Schiff, founder, CEO and global strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, gives a warning that the 2008 crisis was just the prelude to a larger sovereign debt crisis in the United States that may lead to a collapse of the US dollar.
Well, walk me through some of the biggest implications for everyday consumers and your average investor, Peter.
Well, first for consumers, the reason that our consumption-based economy works is because of the dollar status. We're able to export dollars and import real goods. We have $1 trillion a year trade deficit, and we pay for all that merchandise just by printing money. So we don't have to expend any resources, yet we can import $1 trillion worth of goods that the rest of the world consumed considerable resources producing. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're not going to be able to run these trade deficits anymore. Our trade is going to have to be brought into balance. And that means basically, let's say $1 trillion worth of merchandise every year disappears from our shelves. And there's really nothing to replace it with. So what's left is just going to be that much more expensive because not that, many people will be able to buy what's there, right? So your prices have to go way up because the supply of goods has gone way down. Also, credit is going to become far less plentiful because the reverse of this, right? We've been able to send out these dollars that we just create out of thin air and get $1 trillion a year worth of goods that are produced in factories by real workers, right? And then we give them these dollars. And then what do the Chinese or everybody else do with those dollars? They lend them back to us, right? They buy mortgage-backed securities. They buy securitized credit card debt or all these debt instruments that are created. They buy them. So they supply us with goods and then they loan us the money right back after they get paid. And so what's going to happen is we're not going to get the goods anymore, but we're also not going to get the credit. And so consumer credit rates are going to skyrocket. So not only are things going to be much more expensive because we no longer have the products, but you're not going to be able to put them on a credit card. You're going to have to buy the products and pay for them with cash. Forget about this buy now, pay later crap. That's over. You got to buy now and pay now, and you got to pay 3, 4, 5 times what you used to pay.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be massive unemployment initially when the dollar loses its reserve currency status, because that reserve status has supported this consumer economy that is really just a gigantic distribution center where we import goods from the rest of the world and then we distribute it throughout the country. And you have all these stores that people go to buy all this imported stuff that has been, distributed. So it's all logistics and shipping and retail. But when you take away the underlying products that all this service sector economy is based on, then everything that was built on top crashes down. So if you don't have any more merchandise on the shelves at Walmart, you don't need all these Walmarts anymore. There's too many of them. We got nothing to put on the shelves. We don't need all the people that work there. We don't need all the people that we're delivering the goods. We don't need all this stuff collapses when you pull out the bottom, which is the stuff, right? And so unemployment is going to be widespread. We're going to have to rebuild a legitimate economy that is self-sufficient, meaning that if we want to consume, we got to produce. If we want to borrow, somebody else in America has to save. We can't rely on the world's manufacturing capacity, and we can't rely on the world's savings. We have to rely on ourselves, like we did in the 1940s, the 1950s, 1960s, or go further back when we were an exporting nation, when we were a creditor nation. We have to get back to where we were, but we can't get back there with today's level of government. We need a dramatic reduction in the size and scope of our government. We need lower taxes. We need fewer regulations. But in order to make that possible, we need massive cuts in government spending. Now, again, if we don't get that, we just get inflation that wipes everything out, and then we're going to have to start all over again. But it's going to be very difficult to start over again. especially given the way the political winds have been blowing, given how dumbed down the electorate is. It's very scary to be in this situation because America may end up going all in on socialism. I mean, we've been, going down that road to serfdom for a long time, and we may finally get there, and just blame all this on freedom and capitalism and just say the solution is the government has complete control over the U.S. economy. And, then we're Cuba, or Soviet Union or something like that. I mean, so it's very scary where this may eventually head.
And do you have any thoughts on probabilities there? I mean, I want to ask you, what's your long-term outlook? Think in 20 years, are you bullish on America? I mean, when I hear you say things like, we're going to need to rebuild, that sounds optimistic to me. And it sounds like, kind of the century cycles we see in America from the American Revolution.
We're going to need to rebuild. Whether we actually do that is another question. Because in order to rebuild, we need to have a free market, because the government's not going to rebuild anything. So if the government takes over the rebuilding, then we're going nowhere.
Right.
The only successful path is free market capitalism. So that means we have to acknowledge that the problems were caused by government. It's a tough pill to swallow, for our leaders. Now, obviously, we need all new leaders, but, I don't know. I want to be hopeful that when push comes to shove, in the middle of a crisis, we'll do the right thing. We certainly won't do the right thing to avoid the crisis. That's never going to happen. It's going to take a crisis to potentially cause the right thing to be done. So we'll have to see. We're going to have to take our chances. But the one thing I know is that my investment strategy is going to do extremely well. And so at the point this happens, I'll be a lot wealthier than I am today. I'll have a lot more money, and maybe I'll be in a better position to help, get the country to move in the right direction. And I may be willing to spend a considerable amount of that money to do that. They're beholden to voters, and so they have to preserve this illusion in order to get reelected. Okay. But when we have a crisis, a lot of things will change. I mean, you could look at other countries. I always like to look at New Zealand as an example. It's been a long time, but they had a real crisis in the 1980s. They basically bankrupted themselves pursuing a socialist path, and of course they were the poster boys for the middle way. I mean, if you look at how the left was writing about New Zealand in the 70s and 80s, I mean, they were great, right? They were like Sweden, right, or better. They were like, this was government and capitalism coming together. Well, it bankrupted the country. But if you look at the economic reforms that were made under Roger Douglas, and they came from the left, I mean, significant free market reforms that led to a complete resurgence of that economy, in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, so, and the political party that decided to go towards free market capitalism and away from government, it was the same party that led them in the other direction in the first place.
Interesting.
Now, so will the Democratic Party, will they have that kind of epiphany? Will they have that kind of honesty and integrity and do what happened in New Zealand? Well, I think the politicians kind of had their backs to the wall, and it was under those severe circumstances that they made those decisions. And it may be more difficult for U.S. politicians to do the same thing, but we'll see. But that's what's going to have to happen in order to get out of this mess. Now, the good news is that we've had a lot of technological advancements over the years. And even recently, you can see what's going on with AI and the promise that might bring. And so to the extent that we are more efficient, we have better tools, it'll make it easier for the free market to get us out of this hole and to rebuild a viable, self-sustaining economy again. But the path from here to there is very bumpy. And, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money along the way. Well, I think gold is going a lot higher than $4,000. And I think it probably needs to be a lot higher for there to be the type of economic environment that would make such a candidacy, kind of feasible as a reality. But if it's not me, I mean, somebody else I'm not the only one that understands this. I mean, I'm not the only free market, Austrian economist out there, right? I mean, we're just in the minority, but we're there, right? And so it's going to take that kind of environment, I think, runaway inflation, I mean, just a real currency crisis and a real disaster to wake people up and to get the electorate to the point where they recognize what needs to be changed, and that just more empty promises from government checks aren't going to matter if those checks don't buy anything. So some politician promises, oh, we're going to give you more money. I mean, at some point, the voters are going to realize it doesn't matter how much I have, I still can't buy anything.